I think we need to talk about the fact that we are living in a very powerful time in regards to our culture and society's relationship to mental health, emotional health, and neurodivergence. Just the fact that these are collective terms that we're using when I definitely remember a time when they weren't is a really big deal. So I want to talk a little bit now about stigma and misdiagnosis. When I was 4 years old, my teachers told my mom that I should be taken to a child psychologist because they were concerned about the way I was socializing. And the way that they showed her this was by asking me to show her who my friends were, and I didn't show her anybody. So it's evident to me that probably I was spending most of my time playing by myself and reading and maybe what they perceived as talking to myself, but considering that I make money as a psychic medium and channel messages from the unseen, you can imagine. Anyway, what happened next is that at the psychologist, I was diagnosed with autism. And because of the stigma of autism, my mom hid this from the family. You have to understand that this was the 90s and there just wasn't as much information about these things as there is now. I mean, now we don't even use the term Asperger's syndrome, which is much more likely what I would be aligned with. However, I think that there is a big issue here. Let me just first say that my mom is an African immigrant who survived a lot of trauma. So I understand that being told that your child is at a disadvantage, or more likely the way that it was perceived, especially at that time, would have been as defective, is something that would be really traumatizing and scary, just considering how anti-Blackness works. But I knew that she always carried this tremendous fear around this secret diagnosis, and I didn't really know exactly what it was, but I knew that there was something that she was deeply concerned about in terms of my development. When I was a teenager, I begged her to let me get help for ADHD because I was really struggling at school, and she flipped out on me. I'm gonna tie my shoe. So she flipped out on me, and I ended up being able to get diagnosed with ADHD on my own when I was 22 years old. But I have this one particular memory that was very powerful, in which we were in my mom's room watching a movie on Disney Channel about a girl who had an autistic brother who was played by 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗁 called True Confessions. And it was really sad, but what was really painful for me is that I could feel such powerful fear and stigma and just like heartbreak coming from my mother. And now that I say it, I identify that I think that she probably at that time may have been wishing that I don't know. I don't know what she was wishing, but I felt it. So what I did was I wrote her a letter asking her if there was something wrong with me. And asking her, like, if I was, like, special, because, like, I could just feel, and I asked her, like, am I like that boy in the movie? And I could just feel, like, this pain, and I almost want to say, like, loathing and regret. But I don't think that those are necessarily it, as much as, like, heartbreak. And I think that the regret may have come from the fact that she had been really depressed when she was pregnant with me. And I had just gone through so many issues in my life with my emotional health and my mental health. And she assured me that that wasn't true, and that there was nothing wrong with me. And she probably wondered how I even knew. But the memory of what happened at the doctor's office was pretty vague and buried for a long time. There would just be like moments and instances like that where it was clear that I was perceived as being different in a way that was not good. And I experienced a lot of othering by my family of the same generation as me. And I was excluded a lot, and I was bullied. And I think she just really didn't want me to feel like something was wrong with me. And I'll say this much, there was never anything wrong with me. Being different isn't a bad thing. But I overheard her when I was in my late teens, maybe early 20s, telling someone that I had been diagnosed as a child with a social disorder. And she was telling them as if to say, like, but like, look, like, they're fine, like, they're doing great, like, so, you know, maybe, you know, whatever. Essentially to say that, like, I was diagnosed with this social disorder, but like, look at what a success I am. These memories all started coming together and coming to surface really powerfully when I first got sober, and people kind of kept gaslighting me about it, so I just kept putting it off. And finally, when I got my first long-term therapist, I told her about it. And she thought that I was just like being on trend, I guess, but I told her, like, no, like, I was diagnosed when I was 4. I remember, like, my body remembers. I have these fragments, but like, this is what happened. And she's like, well, I can't diagnose you before I have worked with you for over a year. But what I can definitely tell you is that I think that you have CPTSD and maybe generalized anxiety disorder, definitely depression. So my early childhood diagnosis, I feel very differently than my ADHD diagnosis, because I got that when I was 22. The thing is, it wasn't communicated to those psychologists that I was living in deprivation. I wasn't getting my needs met. We were experiencing poverty. They didn't know that I grew up in an abusive household where interpersonal and domestic violence was the norm. They didn't know that we were experiencing emotional abuse, mental abuse, and oftentimes physical abuse, and not to mention neglect. That was also the last year that I saw my dad before I turned 17 years old. So from 4 until 17, I didn't see my dad at all. And I was told by my family members that it was my fault that he had left. So there were all of these dynamics going on, but then there was another thing that I really forgot and didn't really realize or put words to until I started working with my therapist, and really it got a lot more clear over the summer. And that is that I am a survivor of CSA. And it wasn't just regular CSA, it was actually INCESTUOUS CSA. And I'm spelling it because I don't want to get in trouble, and I also really don't want the wrong kinds of people finding this video. So ultimately, I was experiencing all of these different forms of trauma, all valid in their own ways and all excruciating. And as a little kid, I had no idea what to do with any of this, especially as a highly intelligent child who's very sensitive. Like, I didn't know what to do with any of this. I cried a lot, and I would be severely physically punished for crying a lot. And all of the different kinds of abuse I was facing created all of these fragments and disassociative parts of myself that would hide in different places so that I would be able to survive the environment that I was in. And when I did reach out for help, especially in my teenage years, I would be gaslit and forced back into relation with my primary abuser, which is not the same as my perpetrator, or perpetrators, actually. The thing that's not getting its moment in the sun right now, the thing that's not being honored fairly, the thing that's not being destigmatized is the experience of survivors of abuse, particularly sexual abuse. Particularly if they are children, and especially if their perpetrator is a member of their family or somehow a different type of authority figure or caregiver in their life. That's not being destigmatized. That's not being talked about broadly. There's not enough work in the zeitgeist, or really at all, that is happening about this. And so this is really important to understand. A lot of the people who are doing the pioneering work about neurodivergence as well as trauma will be the first to let you know that the symptoms of CPTSD really look a lot like ADHD and ASD symptoms. It's really important for doctors to be able to delineate between them in a way that doctors can identify that it might be ADHD or ASD, which you might be born with, as opposed to is to identify if there was trauma in the person's childhood and if it was prolonged trauma, because prolonged trauma is what's going to be qualified as CPTSD. It's actually miraculous that I even got a diagnosis at all, considering that I was assigned female at birth, and especially in the 90s, people who were assigned female at birth were not necessarily being given this diagnosis. And this is also true now. And this is why a lot of people who are assigned female at birth are gendered and socialized as female, or as women, are now getting diagnosed later in life because of, frankly, stigma and cis heteropatriarchy. But also because it's not until very recently that people really understood the effect that trauma has on the body and they're in the brain. I've only seen one psychologist, one therapist whose specialty is trauma describe CPTSD and trauma as brain damage. So while, yes, I was diagnosed at the age of 4 with having autistic spectrum disorder or Asperger's. Frankly, I don't know, because when I started recovering these memories in full, I had gone no contact with my mother. And yes, I am diagnosed with ADHD. These all could be symptoms of CPTSD, and it's only a matter of working with trained, licensed professionals to figure out really what is going on. However, at the end of the day, all of these names are used to cluster symptoms and treat them. 444. The symptoms are what we are treating. Not the name, not the diagnosis, the symptoms. So at the deepest level, yes, we need to understand why I get anxious, why I can't concentrate. All of that is true. But in a very practical sense, a lot of the treatments, a lot of the ways of responding to the symptoms, they apply no matter what. Ultimately, I need to know how to regulate my nervous system. Ultimately, I am dopamine deficient, which is a big reason why so many people who are diagnosed as autistic and diagnosed as having ADHD are also able to be diagnosed and qualify as having substance use disorder, which we also know as alcoholism and or drug addiction. These are the methods of a very inventive brain of a child who is ill-equipped to handle such experiences, trying to figure out how to keep themselves alive and how to survive through their experience. Because even if you didn't experience abuse, if you are neurodivergent and did not get the help that you needed as a child, that in and of itself is an experience of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That is traumatic. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault. It just happens to be that your experience as a neurodivergent person in a world that's not built to support you and actively therein causes harm is traumatic. So I share this all to share, and I say this all to say, I share that I am diagnosed with autism. I share that, and that's true. I'm diagnosed with ADHD. That's true. More is being revealed, and this isn't to be a stigma because, if I am re-diagnosed with autism, then that's what it is. If I am re-diagnosed with ADHD, which I didn't tell the doctor who diagnosed me that I had this experience of abuse in my history. I didn't tell him not because I didn't want to, but simply because he didn't actually ask. It's still really important to understand that if it is because of trauma that I have these symptoms, trauma healing is also necessary in relation to whatever other types of treatment and therapy I will be having to receive throughout my life in order to rewire my brain from the disordered, maladaptive way that it developed because of the trauma in order to live a fulfilling life. I really hope that this story helps anybody. And I also think that it's really important that if you are concerned about your neurological workings, if you are concerned about your emotional health, your mental health, if you're concerned about any of that, I really want to encourage you to see a doctor. Even though I know that going through the test to be diagnosed with autism can be really triggering for a lot of people, because I've read people's sharing of their experience with that, not because I have gone through it as an adult. Even just starting off by working with a therapist is a really crucial space to start, because you deserve healing, and so do I. I do take ADHD medication and it does help. I do use treatments that are practical that I learned for helping people with ASD, and those all help. But I also know that the CPTSD is foundational for literally everything, especially now that I have this memory or these memories of the CSA that I experienced. I'm sharing this once again just to be of help. I'm not an expert, I just share my experience. If you want to, just have someone listen in a way that has healthy, respectful boundaries, I'm here for that. And I'd love to hear y'all's experience and just hear from all of you, because I know that if I went through this, I can't be the only one. Also, I'm getting new glasses. That's why I have this whole thing going on. I love y'all truly and deeply. Thanks for listening. Happy hunting.